think grief is grief plays such a big part in horror movies, I think, because it's something that we all sadly have to go through. There's a universality to it. It's one of it's a kind of taboo subject that nobody wants to talk about, both in terms of our own mortality and losing people close to you. Horror, I think, is best when it's speaking to the things that we don't ever want to talk about in polite conversation, and grief is such a huge one that hangs over all of us that we never ever speak about. And it's also it's the specter of death, which is also the starting point for so many of our boogeymen. Realism is something that you kind of have to create your own version of in whatever horror movie you do. You basically teach an audience how to watch your movie. So you start out, and if you're pitching everything at kind of zany Evil Dead levels from the beginning, then the audience is going to invest in that same way. They're going to feel like the world is a bit more flippant and a bit more cartoonish. Whereas, with something like The Boogeyman, the idea was, at the end of the movie, you're going to have a family fighting a literal creature in a basement, which is pretty far-fetched and fantastical. But we're going to start with this very realistic portrayal of a family going through grief, and this very dark, very human therapy session, which kicks us off based on the short story. And I wanted to kind of almost lull the audience into a sense of realism that was very grounded at the beginning of the movie, and then slowly, through kind of drip feeding our scare scenes, introducing the monster bit by bit, just as a thing that lurks in the shadows and is off screen, slowly, almost like turn up the heat on the audience so that by the time we get to fighting the monster in the basement, it doesn't feel so far-fetched. It still feels like we're in base reality and this could happen to any of us, that it's we're all we've all potentially got a creature lurking in our dark closet space. When I joined this project, the draft that Beck and Woods had done focused on Will, the therapist father, who was investigating his kid's claims of this creature. It felt to me like the version of the movie that I wanted to tell was more geared towards the younger characters, and I was more interested in kind of evoking those childhood fears and what it felt like to be a kid afraid of the boogeyman. And so we focused on the kid characters, one of which was actually a male character, Sawyer, originally. And slowly as we started to develop those characters, it felt like it would be more interesting if Sawyer was a girl, and that it was about this kind of sisterly bond developing throughout the movie, that we had Sophie's character almost as like a broker between the two worlds of childhood and adulthood, that she was the one who was listening to her kid sister and not quite believing her, but knowing that something was up and trying to kind of parlay that to her dad, who was very much in the world of rationality and adulthood and wasn't believing anything that the children were talking about. And it felt like as soon as we got that dynamic, that sisterly dynamic working, the whole movie started to click into place. Sophie and Vivien are just completely phenomenal. And the thing that I love that they brought to this film is their personality is writ large in this movie. They're both such wonderful people as well as such wonderful performers. And, they gave so much day after day to this movie. And it was so much fun being able to play around with them on set, being able to improvise, being able to workshop scenes. So they would bring their own ideas on the character, but also their own little quirks and their own sense of humor and their own sense of weight to some of the heavier scenes. And this goes for all the cast, for David and Chris and everyone. I'm just so grateful that all of the actors brought so much and invested so much of themselves into this movie. I think you can feel it across the whole film. Their personality is so baked into the DNA of the thing. Absolutely. I think everyone has their own idea of what the boogeyman is and what the boogeyman represents to them. But really, the boogeyman is just the thing that exists in the darkness that's just beyond what we can see. And so I wanted to kind of weaponize the darkness in the movie in a way that meant that we didn't have to show the boogeyman very much. But every time there was a dark space in the frame, the audience was on edge. They felt like they might be able to see the twinkle of some eyes there, or that something might emerge from the shadows. And it was really the idea that I didn't want to kind of invalidate anyone's own personal fears. I wanted them to leave the movie feeling like they'd been terrified all over again, and that they felt like being a kid staring into the darkness of their closet again, but that this movie left them feeling like their boogeyman could still exist in that darkness.